Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Jack Payette. Jack is a proud member of the Ottawa Nation and has held many titles throughout his life. Business owner, interpreter, author, advisor, adult education teacher, and a dedicated volunteer. He is here to share with us the rich history of the land, and following his presentation will conduct a ceremony smudging. On behalf of the Bradford Historical Society and the Blonde Garden Club, we welcome you, Jack, to our special event. Speaker.
Pretty much introduction. This area here has a lot of history, not only for the reason that it was a Scottish settlement, but this used to be the trading route from Toronto to Barrie and beyond. The river system leads right to Lake Simcoe from Toronto. Very few portages. But there might even have been a settlement here at one point prior to this becoming a Scottish settlement. Because the Huron-Wendat tribes used to travel in this area, and they came from Montreal originally, settled in the Toronto area, and then started working their way north because of the Haudenosaunee tribes that live below Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. As they moved north, wherever they settled, they'd only settle there for one generation. And the reason for that was, if they stayed any longer, they would overuse the natural resources that were around them. So what they would do is, after a generation of living, they would send out scouts to find a new area where they could tap into the resources of another area. And so that was very common. So approximately every 20 or so years, the whole community would move. And they wouldn't move all at once. Over a 2-year period, they would probably disassemble. They lived in log houses, much like the Haudenosaunee. And they would disassemble some of their log houses and try to not use new supplies if they didn't have to. They were always very self-conscious about leaving a small footprint. And this is why they never had permanent buildings. The closest they got to permanent buildings were log houses. Those log houses could be taken apart and moved. And rebuilt in their new community. And over the 2-year period, they would transition from one settlement to the other. Eventually, nothing was left in the old settlement, and it was allowed to regenerate. Quite a different practice than we're used to as people now. We're in permanent buildings where we have roads, we have cars, we have all these things that are permanent now. It would be impossible for us to leave a small footprint. But back then, it was very important for these people to leave as small a footprint as possible, just because of their beliefs. Now I mentioned the Haudenosaunee. The Haudenosaunee tribes were south. And once the beaver trade began, they pushed their way up further north in Ontario, from around Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And the reason why is because the furs were better the further north we went. They were thicker and more lush. And so it was in their interest to dominate or take over. And one of the things that they did was they took over the Huron-Wendat tribes. They were more passive. They were gardeners. They're the ones that had a gardening methodology called the Three Sisters. And Three Sisters was the corn stalks. They grew the corn stalks, and then they planted beans so the beans could use the corn stalks to grow. And then they planted some squash. And what the squash did was give cover for the roots system and kept the predatory bugs or animals that would come in there, would keep them away. And so they all worked together, and that's why they call them the Three Sisters way of planting. But these people, after a while, got pushed further and further north. They eventually ended up, they had eight different colonies left, villages, and that was on the peninsula heading out towards Payette. And the Haudenosaunee followed, and they took over there. The Haudenosaunee didn't go any further than Aurelia, that corridor, Aurelia, Midland, Payette, because the Anishinaabe tribes were north of there, and they were just as warlike as the Haudenosaunee were. And so the Huron-Wendat were caught in the middle. They weren't caught in the middle so much as because they were friends with the Anishinaabe, but they were deadly enemies of the Haudenosaunee. And so what happened was some of them went into the Anishinaabe people and were adopted as members of their clans. I use clans. That's a Scottish word, Irish. Clans. In our language, it's Dodo, and it's we put the D in the front, and out west they have a T in the front, totem. And you heard the totem poles?
Yeah.
Well, that's just the family name, basically. That totem pole tells you about what clan they're from out there. And here, we call it Dodo, it was important for people to know what Dodo were. And when I should actually, I'll introduce myself in my native tongue. I'm Odawa, okay? Anin. Anin is just the start of a sentence. It's welcome to Anin. And what that was for is when people visited the village, the first thing we knew was they were on the road several days. And not very nice accommodations for them. And so you welcomed them into your homes. Are you hungry? Right? Just the same as you would. Right? Welcome visitors to your home. So come in. Sit down. Are you hungry? Right? Would you like to stay? There's a nice soft chair over here. That type of thing. Well, it was no different. Right? These people were no different. And they tried to make these visitors as welcome as possible. My spirit game, and I got this through a naming ceremony, which is a whole session itself that I can talk about for an hour. But my name is Wapshi Mashkura Riziki Nini. That sounds like a lot. But what it translates to is White Buffalo Man. I look like a white buffalo. I can say that to the students that I work with. And they have that same reaction. Yeah, you do. That very name, when it was given to me, gave me a responsibility. And the responsibility is to be doing exactly what I'm doing now. Telling our side of the story. That, hey, you know what? We're just as human as you. Right? Even though all of these atrocities were inflicted on some of my ancestors and a lot of other indigenous people, we're resilient. Saying, hey, you know what? We have to go on with life. And the more we get to know each other, the better we get to understand that, hey, we're not too much different. Right? And so my name tells me, dictates to me that I have to come out and speak to people. And that was a good name for me because I like talking. Now, Maingan and Dorum. And now that I mentioned the Dorum, Maingan is wolf. There's a lady over here with some earrings on with a wolf on them. And you can demonstrate you do from our clan. To me, that is an honor to be to that Dorum, because the wolf Dorum, our clan, has a responsibility, and that is to teach, to look and relate stories, and try to communicate with people. Sometimes as a speaker, other times just as a liaison. But nonetheless, I was originally from my native origins. My father grew up on the Macomb Reserve on the Manitoulin Island. A lot of strange names, there are words that are coming out. Macomb, we affectionately call Wiki, and since you spell. And you can say that fast 3 times. But Wiki is where my father grew up. I wasn't allowed to. He took us and moved us to Sault Ste. Marie. We lived in Sault Ste. Marie, and he raised us speaking only English. I've been learning my language. I've saying to Linda that I've taken 3 different courses, and I know how to read, and I can write it. But to speak it is another thing, because if you don't have someone to speak with, then you lose it, and you just don't get that depth. I remember I used to watch my father. He'd go back to Manitoulin hunting with his friends that he grew up with, the ones that were still alive. And I found it fascinating. And they didn't do too much hunting. These guys, it was a good excuse. They parked their rifles and we sat around the fire and talked about old times. And I found that fascinating. And as they spoke, I remember thinking, they must be telling jokes. They're all laughing, you know? And so I asked my dad on the way home after, I said, boy, you guys must have had a lot of jokes you were telling. And he says, jokes? What do you mean? And I says, well, you started talking, and I find, you know, I want to learn the language. But it wasn't very long before he started laughing. And he says, no, that's the language. The language, it's a happy language. When you communicate, you can't help but smile. And I thought, well, that's strange. But then I took those courses, and everybody just had a good time trying to pronounce words and enunciate and try to fit it into a reasonable sense. And I thought, hey, yeah, I can understand kind of where they're coming from. But I was growing up in the Sioux, and the Odell word for Sault Ste. Marie is Wawatini, right? And I went to a high school in Wawatini in the Sioux. That's when I first learned that was the name. It was the place of the rapids, right? Wawatini. Now I live Aurelia, and I say Aurelia Megwadinda means that's where I presently live. My home is in Aurelia. And of course, I tell you, I'm Odawa. And so, with that said, anyone we met on the trails back in those days, you looked at the way they were dressed first. And interesting, everybody knows Ojibwe. Right? Well, that was one of the clans of the 3 clans that we had. But if you had certain puckered toe shoes on, people would say, oh, you're the one wearing these puckered toe shoes. Oh, Ojibwe. Ojibwe. And so that's where the word Ojibwe came from. Oh, Ojibwe. You're the one wearing these puckered toes shoes. The names, the Owenda tribes, that word Owenda came because they were island dwellers. They were originally from the Montreal area. All those islands are in Montreal. That's where they came from. They were chased out of there by the Haudenosaunee tribes. And we eventually settled around Lake Simcoe. And then down to Toronto, or from Toronto up to around Lake Simcoe, and then eventually off the peninsula in Payette. The Haudenosaunee, their name translates, they're the people of the longhouses. Okay, and this is where the longhouses came from. They lived in longhouses. Longhouses were, depending on the size they wanted, but they put levels in their longhouses. And one family would live in each section, so that you had a fire, a place for the smoke to escape, and that would be their section. And some longhouses had maybe 5 or 6 families living in one longhouse. They had other longhouses they used for their nurseries, their schools. Their children went to school, but the instructor, the teachers were the elders, and usually female elders, because all of our societies were matriarchal. They were the ones that the grandmothers usually told the stories, and this is how they taught. They taught by telling stories. And I have several stories that I use to work. I have next Monday, I have a group of grade 1 and 2s. And hopefully I'm just as great and as fast as they are when I do get to tell a story. You can tell when they're not interested in your story because they're gone. Notice I digress a lot. But getting back to Haudenosaunee, their longhouses were fairly common. If you've ever been over to Midland, you see a longhouse over there. Well, that was Huron-Wendat longhouses, because they were the same of the same area, and so they used longhouses too, just like they Haudenosaunee. And that was the distinction between the two. One was the Haudenosaunee had 5 main tribes at one time, nations that got together, and they put together a deal with each other, a pact, and it was called the One Dish with One Spoon pact, and it ended up being called a treaty. And that treaty was to say that they would all support each other from that point on, and they wouldn't interfere with each other. And so they all agreed that they would stay on their own territory and not infringe on anybody else's territory without permission to visit. But more importantly, only take what they need from your resources on your territory and use every bit of what you take. And that was very important, because what that ensured was they're going to be a sustainable life. And so these 5 never fought again from that pact on. And now they made that pact in 1100, early 1100s, 1102 or something like that. And that whole treaty never came to surface again until the end of the Beaver Wars. And the Beaver Wars ended basically in the mid-1600s, 1650, 60. And what happened was the British and the Haudenosaunee were allies, and they armed them and rifles. And the Anishinaabe people were allied with the French, and they armed them. Those ones in the middle were farmers. They had nothing, really. And so that's why they got pushed out by the Haudenosaunee and accepted by the Anishinaabe to live with them. But what happened is that treaty came back out, and they went to Montreal, and there was several other tribes down in the Toronto area yet that the Haudenosaunee wiped out on their way up to get the Hurons window. And when I say wiped out, they didn't kill them. What they do is if their village population was getting low or aged, they breed another tribe and take their young and adopt them. They were part of their tribe, and they raised them that way. And they take women if they needed women to repopulate. So slavery went on in this country before a European influence. And that's how it went on. Like they take some young boys and all of us workers. You paddle the canoes, you carry the loads, and you have no choice. And if they found that they didn't have somebody that was willing to do it, well, it's easy enough just to eliminate it. And so you had a lot of things. Now, when the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee had wars from that point on, both sides were agreed that no, we don't want to use our population fighting each other. So what we'll do is we'll have a competition. And that's where the game lacrosse came from. And lacrosse, it wasn't just a ball with a bag against the ball and toss it. You were workouts. And you had to possess this object, ball. And whoever came out of it, still alive, was the winner. And someday there's this competition. This lasted maybe 2 weeks. You know, it didn't last just for a day or so. And so it was hunting parties. They were out searching for each other and bringing back proof that there's no more of them on the other team. So it was kind of deadly. But it was restricted to your gamers. Right? And usually you try to pick your best. And then you raised the next generation the best in case you had to do this again sometime. But yeah, it was a rather cruel way of existence. And that's what it was, existence. The Anishinaabe tribe was the Three Fires Confederation, and they consist of the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe. Now, the Odawa, depending on where you lived, sometimes it came out as Ottawa, and that's where the name Ottawa came from. There was a population of Odawa that lived in that area, and they adopted that name Ottawa. The Ojibwe, if you go to Rama, right, or Muslim Reserve, on Christian Island, you'll get to call himself Chippewa. And it's a variation of Ojibwe. Like I was saying, about the shoes. You know, right? And so, but they took the O off, and they took the Scottish out of it. Right? And they just kind of, they don't like me telling that joke. I gotta be okay here. But what happens is, you had all of these events happening in this very area. It was probably well forested through this area at one point prior to the settlement being here. Very little land was cleared. The only time you virtually had the land cleared was in Midland, little community between Midland and Erlelia. No. Yes? No, it's going to be the other meeting. Okay, anyway, this cold water. These things happen.
We're all out.
Cold water, and they said, what we have to do is we have to clean this area out of all the natives between Toronto and Penetang. And the reason why is because of the War of 1812, they needed a safe passage for all their resources and their equipment to go from Toronto to Penetang without being interrupted. Well, the natives were not allies of the British. And the British took over, and so the natives had very few allies left because the French basically stayed in Quebec or Canada and the British stayed here. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to make sure that they could get those native people out of that area. And so what they did was they sent their armies in and said, come on, we've got a deal for you. We want to take you up to Coldwater. We've got a great deal for you. And so he took them up to Coldwater, and they did two things really good. They said, we're going to make farmers of you. Okay, you won't have to hunt anymore. You're going to farm. And you're going to make money. And they said, oh, and by the way, you won't need your weapons anymore because you're farmers. You don't need weapons. Okay, we'll look after you. And we have every year. And so not only did they get them off the land that they wanted them off, but they also disarmed them. So, well, they put them to work in the Coldwater area, clearing the land, planting gardens, and within 5 years they had the best market in upper Lower Canada. And they were starting to make a few bucks. All at once you had some kind of wealthy Indians. And the settlers around there said, hey, we're dirt poor. What's wrong with this picture? I didn't come all the way over here and not be able to make the money that they're making. So the new governor at the time decided, oh, okay, we'll fix that. This Coldwater thing was just an experiment. And so it was called the Coldwater experiment. And they said, okay, what we're going to do, right, is now we made you farmers. You proved you're good farmers. We're going to give you a piece of land that you go farm on. And that was the start of their first reservations in Canada. They took the one group and said, okay, your group is going to Beausoleil Island. And they said, well, some of these people aren't good. That's okay, they'll get used to it. You'll get them on it. They're out, okay, next group. And again, we're going to ship you down to Georgina Island. Okay? And again, not all these people are our people. That's okay. You'll get used to it. Okay? And so off they went. And they did that with 5 different groups. Another group went to Perry Sound, Perry Island. They started to get a picture. Island. It was easy to control them, right? Because little did they know, these people, that they were given farmland. You can't farm anything on Bosley Island. That's why they eventually moved over to Christian Island. Bosley Island was rocks and snakes. If you've ever been there, that's what it is, rocks and snakes. You couldn't plant anything there. And so, but then they run out of remote islands for these people. So, wait a second, we've got another place here. It's a point, but that's okay. We'll be able to tell if you get off that point. Right? You're surrounded by water on two sides. We'll watch the third side. Right? And so they sent in there, and those were the Potawatomi. And the Potawatomi saw what was happening, so they gathered. So most of the Potawatomi ended up over on the point, close to the middle. Then you got the rest of you, and that was Chief Meskwaki. I don't know how he got to be chief of the Native people from the Aurelia area. He was a redhead. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, I digress again. But they said to them, oh, you can't move back to Aurelia because we're established there now. So we're going to put you around. There's some nice private land over there that you can farm. And so what they did was they gave them land. If you ever go over to or look on a map, the area of here we go, the moment again, Rama, and you'll see that it's not a continuous reserve area. Because what happened was there were some people already moved over there, eh? And he said, well, they're squatters. Oh, they're okay, they're friends of mine, don't worry about it. Just, they've already picked up a piece of land, they're okay there. And so you'll see that there's reserve, and there's a huge reserve. And then the last piece of that reserve was this. You have some money from your gardening experiment. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow you to buy a little bit of land, but there won't be that much money left because it's just about the right amount to cost of setting these lands aside and transporting you there for your new home, where you're going to be farmers. And so the neighbors followed up on that in Rama. They bought a piece of land, right, to add to their reserve, eventually, but it wasn't continuous with the other. And so, again, you had that patchwork of that reserve. But that's where your first 5 reserves in Canada came from, the cold water experiment. Again, most of those people, their ancestors went through residential school, Toronto. They went, some of them just finding their way back to their original family from being adopted back in the 60s. They call it the 60s school. And so these people really haven't had too much fun in their life. Right from back in the days they settled in this area. It was a hard struggle. The homes of the Anishinaabe people were dome-like. And the reason for that was because they wanted to make as small a footprint as they could. So they didn't find a forest area that you had plywood trees, and they bend them over and tie them, and that's what you got the shape from. And then they cover them with birch bark. Birch bark in our language is wigwas. So therefore it became a wigwam. Right? And it was dome-shaped, right? Because of that. It's amazing how like the teepee, we kind of used lean-tos at times, and some of them did accidentally become teepee-shaped. But teepees were common out west, out in the prairies. Because out west, they would follow the herds, the buffalo herds, until they eliminated those. But that was another story. But anyway, this area had a lot of history dating back to 1100, where they traveled all this way, back and forth, back and forth. And in Barrie, when they got to Barrie, very interesting point, they considered that a sacred land, right where Springwater Park is. Anybody been to Springwater Park? Yeah. And before the government had it as a park, provincial park, so as you can go and visit the animals and go for a walk through the forest. And but what happened was, the government decided that it wasn't feasible anymore. They were going to close it down. And the natives heard that and said, oh, you can't, what are you going to do with it? Well, we'll sell it off to probably condos in here. He said, you can't do that. I said, why? It's because our ancestors kept stories going for thousands of years about that being sacred land. It was sacred land. What makes it sacred? So more importantly, it was the water. The water there, it was unique, right? And they knew this because of their heightened sense of taste, smell, just comparing it to other waters. Matter of fact, it got known so well that people would purposely have a pilgrimage from their settlements to the sacred land in Barrie, Coldwater Park, and they would do a water ceremony, and they'd take some of that water and take it back to their home community and do a water ceremony there and put that water into theirs in hopes that it would influence their water. And so once that story was told to the government officials, they said, well, we're not going to spend another cent on it. And they said, how about if we make it self-sustaining? And they said, okay, we'll make an agreement with you. If you can keep it self-sustaining, not going to cost us anything, we'll allow you to run it. And so for the last 10 years or so, it's been run by a good friend of mine and a gentleman from Bush Lake, who was an ex-chief and war veteran. And so he owned it. And the first thing he did was he took some of that water and sent it off to Switzerland to get it tested. And what came back was, we have a new standard. The cleanest water in the world, the purest water in the world is right in Barrie. And how it's going to be affected is by all the areas, the green areas that surround that whole underground cavern of water. And that's our green spaces right now outside of Toronto that they're anxious to develop, and there's high demand not to touch those green spaces because it's a direct flow to the aquifer underneath between Toronto and Midland. That's how huge that aquifer is. And the deepest part of that aquifer is right by Springwater Park. That's why it was called Springwater, because the water was enough force to spring up and kept lakes there. And so we're sitting on the cleanest water in the world, right here in Barrie. How many have been to Aurelia and saw the weirs? Yeah, thank you. Another moment. What's happening? Fish weirs are something that is mind-boggling because those fish weirs are over 5,000 years old. They were there before the pyramids of Giza. Think about it. And what they had was, it was all built up on their philosophy, right? That you only take what you need, and use every bit of what you take to show respect for all the resources around you. Right? And you honor those of which you took, whether it was plant or animal. And there was a lot of different ways we honor them, emulating animals with their clothing, their age, doing dances to emulate them. We made one of our medicines, tobacco. Tobacco was a positive medicine back in the day before BWGLHA decided what he wanted to do with it. And the tobacco leaf, the original tobacco leaves, not too many plantations around with the original tobacco leaves. But if you get some, they used to get worm wounds or cuts for whatever reason, and they just cover it with the leaf, nothing else, and they leave it on and change the dressing every once in a while. But once it was healed, there wouldn't even be a scar. That's how much of a medicine it was. I used to take students, and I called it my medicine walk. And I'd walk through the forest, and then stop and say, "See all those trees over there? Right? What do you call this bunch of trees? Bush." No. That was a grocery store. What? So yeah, walk over to and say, "See a group of trees? That was a drugstore." "Hey, that's a group of trees. That was a factory." "Factory what?" "Oh, we made our homes out of that, out of the birch bark, and we made canoes out of the birch bark." Oh, you start looking at the bunch of trees looking differently. And so by the time we were done, they didn't feel as insecure when they walked into the trees. I was just looking at those white birch stand there. They all look like they're straight up and down, but I don't think any of them are straight up and down. And we all look alike, but they're not. When you look at closely, they all have their own appearance. And it's like us. I would tell them. And when you look at those trees are no different than us. They're about 85% water. So, and when we pass away, there's a purpose, right? Because we've left food for those other youngsters that are growing. And we do that when we pass away. Even though our body isn't here, they have memories and teachings that they bring, they grew up with, and we're still influencing. I know I still think of my father. I'm 80 years old now, and so he was long ago. He died actually. He was just young, 56. 56 years old. But anyway, again, I digress, eh? Anyway, we should wrap it up. Is there any questions I can try to answer? Yes.
My mother always said in the summertime the natives would come down the canal. As you're going down into the marsh on the 400, on the west side of the 400, there's a bit of a hill there. And she said that they would camp there, and they would fish, and they would trade their goods. And she said she could remember that when she was a kid. They would come down the river, and that's where they would stay. And I don't know if they've done any excavation there or anything, but it's up, it's the hill, and it's a way in there. And she said they stayed there.
If there's any digs, the best chances are that they'd be Huron encampments.
Yeah.
I was on a dig one year. I was over in Bushel Island. It seems ironic that we're there because it's rock. But there are some soil patches. where they lived, and they had their burning pits, and so we had been over there one year. But yeah, it's more than likely one of the settlements could have been there at one point, because they moved all over. So when people started building, and they started building their towns or their villages or their cities bigger, the more they widened, the more they were apt to hit one of the settlements, and all of these things would have to be collected and quantified and stored, and it slowed up construction. And so after a while, some say, no, don't tell me, just keep on digging. because over 8,000 or 9,000 years, and you moved every 20 years, your mountain had. The only thing that was different was that some groups would bury their the ones that passed away, but they would dig them up and take them with them to the next village and bury them again. And so this happened with some. So then they had a midden, a place where all the bones were gathered together, and it was so that they could keep their spirits together. That's the one thing that I wanted to mention about. We talked about someone passing away, and in our customs, we have what's called a transition ceremony, and it's a 5-day ceremony, but 4 days of that is we're showing respect to the spirit, because in our life we believe everybody has a spirit. Every living thing, everything has a spirit, because it was made by the Great Spirit, and therefore the Great Spirit made and left you with a piece of that Great Spirit. And because we all have a spirit, we always consider ourselves equal. We're equal with those trees, the animals, the plants. We consider ourselves unequal with everything. And so what happens is, when someone passes away, I was just at a funeral 3 weeks ago in Blanford, where my one nephew passed away, almost the same age as my father, and he passed away for the same reason in part. And I went there and I performed a 5-day passage. And each morning, my wife and I would get up and we'd take the first piece of our breakfast and put it aside. And then we'd offer that through the fire, because a fire would burn for 5 days. And so we bring that to the fire and offer it to the spirit as nourishment. Right? And we did that for 5 days, every meal. Lunch, first bite, dinner, same thing. And what happens is you get to understand what the closeness of a partner or a family or a friend is, how deep it is when you stretch that grieving and that transition over a 5-day period. And not only is it a grieving part, but it's a celebration at the end of the 5 days that the Spirit has finally made it to its crossover. Anyway.
What can you tell me about the bone bit by Kirk?
The bone bits? I'm not too sure what was involved, but there would have been.
Mass burial, was that all in one battle?
That could have been. You see, because the whole village is were slaughtered at times. Right? The only time when they wanted, they take their supplies, they would take their young, but the elderly, the warriors especially would go first. So then they take young supplies to a certain age, and the rest would be slaughtered.
The size one time said over 1,000.
Yeah, well,
I didn't know that was like mass.
it could have been a collection. Over the years, they would repeat their ones that passed away and bring them to the next village. And after a while, that's quite a number.
It used to be the public, that's a lot. Every year, hospitals would pay the people to come to Bottomless Square, and they have one day.
It's only conjecture of my life. Like I work at the museum in Gravenhurst now. They have a museum, native museum, and any digs that we have always been with shards in pottery and implements like axe heads and that type of thing. The bones, yeah, and much experience with the bones. Yeah, maybe any. Oh, is that right?
Well, on behalf of the Historical Society and the Garden Club, we thank you, Jack, for sharing your knowledge and stories about the area's rich history, and we look forward to the ceremony smudging and memorial to Jill